All right, I've got some sleep and I can test out some CPUs. I was interested in doing that last time already, but I also saw some comments on the video last night saying that the low performance could be that I'm CPU limited in this scene, even though I was on a 7800X 3D, and we'll certainly look at that in this video, but we'll also test out some lower end CPUs to get a good idea of what's going on. Also, it might be reasonable to take a look at the system requirements for this game and what they point to for the minimum and recommended CPUs. Looks like we're seeing a Ryzen 5 2600X or an Intel Core i7 6800K for our minimum system requirements for Starfield if I actually go to Bethesda's actual support page. And I don't have either of those. I do have an i5 9600K, which we will take a look at. And I do have a Ryzen 5 5600X, which is a bit better than the recommended. And then I do have the 7800X 3D that I was using when I was doing my GPU testing. So again, basically my 9600K is definitely worse than a 10600K. The 10600K has hyper-threading, so it's 6-core 12-thread and newer cores, whereas my 9600K is just 6-core 6-thread and the older cores. My 5600X will be a bit better than the recommended CPU. And then the 7800X 3D tends to either be, trade blows with the i9 13900K from NVIDIA. It's not, from Intel, which I don't have. Anyway, so the plan here is I'm just gonna pop in a 4090 into each of these systems, play through that same kind of area, maybe look at some other areas of the game, and again, why a 4090 to make sure that we are CPU limited, not GPU limited. I'll talk more about that as we get going. Let's just run some tests. All right, so we're testing the i5 9600K. Yes, it is paired with a RTX 4090, but the whole purpose of the 4090 is to remove any potential GPU limitation on our frame rate. We're also down at 1080p and at a 50% resolution scale using FSR2. We are at the Ultra preset to make sure anything that taxes the CPU is turned on, but then putting in a crazy powerful GPU on a weak CPU and a low resolution in order to see the maximum performance that the i5 9600K is able to reach. I know a lot of people get confused when we pair the big GPU with the low-end CPU. The goal here is to see the limits. I'm gonna go ahead and run through the same benchmark run that I did on my GPU testing, but remember my GPU testing was done on a powerful CPU, a 7800X 3D. Here we can see that all 6 cores are basically maxed out. We're around 90 to 100% usage on all of them. And it's looking like the overall frame rate in New Atlantis, which I expect to be one of the heavier CPU areas of the game, usually larger cities with a lot of NPCs tend to be that way in games. Yeah, it's looking like we're gonna be averaging in the mid-40s with some definite frame time spikes down into the 20s. But not every place is as bad as that exact benchmark run. If we continue to run around here, it certainly is possible to hit 60 frames per second at times. Another thing we could look at here is what if we looked at other areas of the game. If I went back to, a different game save, we could also look at the, load screen time and all that since we're filming this live. Because one of my other points is that New Atlantis is a stress test, I think, for both the CPU and the GPU in this game. And so I wanted to use that when I was doing my GPU testing, but I thought it might also make sense. Here, I'm going to kick on the benchmark counter to test out some other scenes. So here we're not in a big city. Wow, my mouse sensitivity is not adjusted at all. This is about 5 times the mouse sensitivity that I would like to be playing at right now. So please excuse the aim. This is not the PC I'm normally on, and it looks like it did not carry over my mouse sensitivity settings from my normal PC. It's looking like here in combat, the i5 9600K, in combat in this area, not a ton going on here, but not like just a tiny bit. The 9600K it's looking like maintaining over a 60 FPS and even around a 70 FPS average. This is a teammate? That's probably a teammate. I'm not really paying attention. I'm staring at the frame rate counter. All right, so I think that gives us a rough idea of a variety of different situations. It does certainly look like New Atlantis can push us well below 60, but other areas of the game could be better. Let's go ahead and hop over to a different CPU. Maybe we'll bump it up to like a 5600X. All right, we now have the Ryzen 5 5600X. Side note, I'm using the stock cooler on here. That's just the PC I happen to set up now, so you certainly could get a better cooler on there. But anyway, we're gonna get 1080p again at 50% resolution scale, so actually way below 1080p, same settings as before. And we'll take a look at some of the same kinds of scenes. It's looking like this CPU is able to get a little over 60 FPS right at this spot. Let's go ahead and do the run through town and see how we do. Yeah, this area definitely does seem very CPU bound. I mean, it should be CPU bound on the settings we're using, but like, we're hitting the CPU limit at only around 60 frames per second, and actually in kind of the mid 50s at times. On a Ryzen 5 5600X, so that's a 6-core, 12-thread CPU from not too long ago. And actually, yeah, it's looking like we are using a lot of the CPU threads, so at least the game isn't completely, like single-threaded or anything like that. But again, as we kind of run through, that particular area I was in can be, more CPU bound than others, right? As I go over here, you'll notice that the momentary frame rate is hitting a little bit higher. But as we run around, we can certainly get different results. But it is looking like overall 60-ish FPS, certainly with some dips on a Ryzen 5 5600X with those settings. Let's go ahead and take a look at the not New Atlantis save again, and I guess you'll get a brief look at the load time. Anyway, again, sorry I have the stock cooler on here. I mean, it's getting the job done. You can see the clock speeds are hitting about where they should. All right, let's go ahead and hit the benchmark counter again. So starting up the averages and 1% lows. And let's see what happens as we get into some combat. The mouse sensitivity seems a little better on this PC, I guess. But I guess I'm out of range for fighting this particular guy with this particular gun. Okay, yeah, looking like we're kind of getting into the 70s or so in this particular area. So yeah, still not able to get a super high frame rate on the CPU. So it looks like we are definitely able to get quite CPU bound in this game. All right, so the other option is we can then look back again at the high-end CPU with the Ryzen 7800X3D and see if we do any better. All right, we're now going to look at a high-end CPU, the Ryzen 7800X3D, 8 cores, 16 threads. We can see a lot of them getting a pretty big workout here, but our frame rate counter is around 100 FPS, and once again, we'll double check our settings are all the same, 50% of 1080p at the ultra stuff, upscaling with that FSR. So let's go ahead and see how our pass through New Atlantis goes. Kicking on the benchmark run, so you can see the averages in the middle and the 1% lows on the right. Frame time graph looks fairly smooth. So again, we still are CPU limited. You can see the GPU is not hitting 100% usage, so we are seeing the limitations of the CPU platform. I have 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory on this system, and it looks like we're averaging in the mid-90s, which with 1% lows near 80 for this section of the benchmark pass. Now, also I want to just bring up that some people in my other video testing GPUs said I was CPU limited, but I think we're proving here that I wasn't, because my GPUs were generally not getting near 100 FPS on this CPU. So I don't think that was CPU limitations that we were seeing, but I do think that many other people might be CPU limited in New Atlantis because of, you can see that on the, not the Ryzen 7800X3D CPUs, we very much were having trouble hitting high frame rates. Let's go ahead and see how that other scene that we've been looking at does on this CPU. I think that was this game save. Also see if our load screen goes any faster. I'm also on a pretty fast NVMe drive on this system. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the frame rate counter. It looks like we are now... Actually, the GPU usage is getting fairly high here, although the power usage on the 4090 is pretty low, so it's still a good chance that we are more CPU limited than not. But yeah, it looks like around 100 frames per second. I'm staring at frame rate counters instead of what I'm doing, but I think we get the idea. This person trying to hit me with an axe? No, thank you. All right, I think I'm gonna pop out and give some final thoughts. All right, let's pop back out for some final thoughts. A couple of things. One is, yes, it's very easy to be CPU limited in this game. We saw the 9600K, especially in New Atlantis, not able to hold over 60 FPS at all times. And then we even saw the 5600X, which is a much newer, good gaming CPU from just a few years ago. Again, not always over 60 FPS. Now, again, I don't have the fastest tuned RAM in these systems or anything. The 9600K is, I think it's DDR4 3000 CL, I forget the CL speed, CL15? And then this system was 32 gigabytes of DDR4 3600 CL18. And then we have the Ryzen 7800X3D with the DDR5 6000 CL30 memory, and 95 FPS in basically the same scene here. And I thought this was pretty interesting because one thing is, I feel like I was expecting a larger performance jump from the 9600K to the 5600X. Not only is it faster individual cores, but also getting access to that hyper-threading seemed like I would expect to get more than this, 4950-ish up to, 5860-ish. In a performance jump. And then I wasn't expecting to almost double performance up to nearly 100 FPS on the 7800X3D. So out of all of these, I guess I felt like the 5600X was kind of underperforming maybe. And maybe this game really likes the 3D V cache on these chips or the DDR5 memory or both. Now, I really wish I had more CPUs ready to go to test for you guys. The only other system I have is a 5950X, which usually has similar gaming performance here. It would have more threads, but it's also my capture PC. I record these externally, so it would be annoying to try to record the benchmark on that one. Anyway, so I would say that definitely you're gonna be dipping below 60 FPS because of your CPU if you have any kind of an older CPU beyond some of the absolute latest and greatest, at least based on the sample that I can test. Also, again, I don't have exactly what's in the system requirements list, but the 9600K wasn't hitting quite 60 FPS, but the 10600K should improve on that. The 3600X, we're definitely seeing the 5600X, which is a better gaming CPU, not always locked over 60, but certainly not a bad experience. And again, when we did take a look at other places in the game, like the combat scene here, up more into the 70s and things like that. And that's kind of the other thing I wanted to mention, again, is I've been using New Atlantis as a stress test. So don't feel like the entire game is going to perform as badly as New Atlantis did in what we saw here. But anyway, this has certainly been an interesting mix of performance. I have not played much of the game, so I can't really speak to what the rest of the game looks like or any of that. But yeah, I think that's where I'm planning on ending my Starfield coverage, at least for now. Maybe if we get any big updates or new drivers or something like that, I could take another look. Also, Intel Arc GPUs. In my GPU video, some people were asking why I didn't cover any Intel Arc GPUs. It turns out that they're not supporting the game yet. It won't load, it won't run. And so it looks like Intel is aware of the issue and is hoping to get a game-ready driver for the actual release day, which I think is September 6th, rather than this early access period for the people who spent way too much money on the premium edition. Hopefully you guys found this one interesting and useful. Again, wish I had more CPUs to test, but I really focus more on GPUs on the channel, so this is just what I had on hand, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.